Everyone. In this video, I'm going to be giving you a detailed discussion on the InetVis user interface. If you haven't already, I suggest that you watch the summary video, which explains how to quickly get started in actually using the application. Alright, so the UI, this is the visualization cube or the InetVis main display, and this is the control panel. So basically, this is just a 3D scatter plot with a 2D plane below it. As I described in the previous video, we have the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis, and these represent the destination network, the port, destination port, and the source network respectively. And this plane is the ICMP plane, so ICMP events are plotted on that plane. Okay, going to go through the control panel in a bit more detail. The replay position, this works similarly to any media player you've ever used. When a packet capture file is playing, it's going to progress, you can seek, and so on. When it gets to the end, it's stopped. The replay speed, basically by default we play it at its standard speed, but you can put that to 2, 3, 4, all the way up to about 86,000, which will make it play back faster, or that many times faster. You can also reduce the speed if you really need to get more granular control over what you're displaying. The play button is just a play/pause button. You can get the same effect by pressing spacebar on the cube when you have a file loaded. This record section here, it has some functionality that lets you record various aspects of your visualization. So this first one lets you output events into a new PCAP file. So the way it works is you click it, then from then on, new events that come in or that are found in the packet capture file will be written out. And when you click again to stop, all of the events that were collected during that period will be written out to a PCAP file. And you can find these on disk under the root log directory, or the root recording directory, which we'll have a look at where to find that just now. These other two options, this one records a single image snapshot, so just a screenshot of the cube, and outputs it to disk in the format and the quality that you've set, again in settings that I'll go through just now. This option does a frame capture, which is the same as a snapshot, but it happens for every frame that is generated. So if you switch on the frame per second count, you can do that by pressing 9. You can see by default there's about 25 frames per second. So you're going to get about 25 frames written out per second. This can slow things down a lot, but it can be useful if you want to make a video out of what you're visualizing. The next thing to look at is the historic view. So this is basically how long events will be shown on the screen for. So by default it's set to 1 day, which just means events older than 1 day will be removed from the cube. And you can set this you can set this up to about 5 years, and you can set it all the way down to milliseconds. And basically this means you can make sure things don't get too cluttered. If you've got too much on the screen and you can't figure out what's going on, you can decrease the time window, get rid of some of those extraneous events. Alright, the filter section, we just have the Berkeley packet filter expression. This lets you enter an expression, and based on that expression, only matching events will be plotted. So you can use that to further reduce what events are displayed. Alright, so next, just having a quick look at the menus. In the main menu here, you have the About InetVis. Now, and this is where it is in Mac OS, but in Linux, it is under the Help menu. Mac moves it here for some reason. This is just the standard application About dialog. So the most useful thing here is shortcuts. So all of the application shortcuts are listed here. These are very helpful to know. Okay, then Under File, you can Open, which lets you open a PCAP. You can navigate to your PCAPs directory and open one. Mode, replay capture file is basically the same as file open. Monitor localhost lets you monitor your local network interface for network events. However, this does not work on Mac OS, so I won't be showing you that, but it works perfectly fine in Linux. And it uses the libpcap library under the hood. Replay menu, that's basically same as pressing this play button. Record is the same as these buttons here. So you can capture the current frame, dump frames, and record a PCAP file. The next thing, where all of the other dialogues in the application live, is the view menu. So just something to mention here, you can put the cube into full screen if you like. To get out of that, you can press F or escape. Plotter settings is the first and most useful of the dialogues. Here you can set your the ranges that are shown on the cube. So destination home range, that's x-axis. You can generally, what you'll do is you'll open a packet capture and you'll click guess, and it'll figure out what the destination home network subnet should be. But you can always override this, or you can load it from settings if you've populated that value under general settings. You can do the same with a source internet address if you want to restrict it further. By default, it's on the full range. Port range, same here, you can adjust it. So instead of doing the entire port range, you could restrict it to the first 1025 ports, for example. You can also put in, use log scale, and so on. Further, you can adjust the colors. So by default, the points are plotted using a destination port color scheme. So this means that as ports go up, the colors will change correspondingly. And you can change this to various different color schemes. You can change the background from black to white. Obviously, if you change it to white, the cube will adjust accordingly. However, on macOS, if you change it to white, the program will crash. So don't try that. However, it works in Linux. Then these other options here, transparent decay, that when events get too old and fall out of your time window, they'll decay transparently. You can set the point size of the points that are plotted. You can smooth them, which generally makes them a bit smaller and rounded, and you can set them to bulge, which generally just bulges them for a fraction of a second, and it lets you see what's new. Right, the next one to look at is the reference frame settings. So this looks at what we call the reference frame of the cube, which is basically what you see here. So you can change your perspective mode, or projection mode from perspective to orthographic if you like. You can choose what you want to see, primary axes, markers. If you don't want your primary axes, you can get rid of them, and so on. Transparent grid, these are these grid lines. You can choose where you want them. You can choose the opacity of them, and so on. I mean, the defaults are generally good for everyday purposes. You can change the number of partitions there, the graduations. Again, you might not need to change any of this. The labels, so if you don't want axes labels, you can get rid of them. You can switch on your frame rate from here as well as by pressing 9, and so on. That's about it for that settings dialog. On the general settings, so in here are a whole lot of new settings that have been added. These are all persisted to disk. So the first section is record settings. So this has to do with these record features. So you specify a root directory. You can then specify a subdirectory under that root directory where your PCAPs will live, where your frames will live, and where your snapshots will live. And furthermore, depending on whether you're monitoring the local host or you're replaying packet capture, the subdirectory underneath these three directories will be different and will be specified there. On the right here, you see that lets you, if you edit, you can save it by clicking the tick button. if you want to basically undo, if you've typed something in here and you haven't saved it and you want to undo that, you press this button, which basically just reads the value from disk and repopulates this field. If you've already set this to something and you want to reset it to the default, that button will do the trick. If you've messed up your settings badly and you want to reset everything, there is a button for that, reset all settings. And if you just want to repopulate all the fields based on what's on disk, you can use the load from disk button. Home network settings, I mentioned these in this one in the plotter settings. You can set your default home network IP address range here. So if you set this, you can then load it when you open up the plotter settings. And this could be useful if, for whatever reason, it doesn't guess it properly and you need something custom every time. The next one is show home network not set warning. So you'll probably notice very quickly that whenever you open a new packet capture, it will say your home network is not set, and it'll recommend you set it. This is very good advice, as you should always set your home network, but this is an annoying pop-up, and you can easily switch it off here by setting that to 0. Finally, for this section, the default live monitoring interface. So by default, if you switch into monitor localhost mode, the libpcap library will select what it thinks is the most appropriate network interface to monitor. This doesn't always work, however, so you can override that here. If you specify a network interface name here, that's what will be used when you monitor localhost. Log file settings, so this lets you specify the directory and file names where some logs will be written out to. Not all application logs are written to these files just yet. Some of them will still appear on normal standard in, standard out, or standard out, standard error. But the majority of new logging will go to these files. Finally, snapshot settings. This is where you can set the format of your snapshots. PNG offers nice compression, and small file sizes, but is slow to produce. So if you're doing a lot of snapshots or a lot of frames, you could put it into PPM or BMP mode, which will produce much larger files, as these aren't compressed. These are raw image files, but they can be produced much faster. The snapshot quality, by default, -1 just means use the library's default quality setting, as this differs per format. But you can also change it there based on those explanations. And finally, if you don't want to use the same extension, you can specify your own extension. So all this will affect is the actual file name of what's produced. You can enter whatever you like there, but it does make sense generally to keep these two the same, just to be consistent. And yeah, you can close obviously the dialog with that. That's basically it as far as the application UI goes. There are some, as I mentioned earlier in the About section, there are some keyboard shortcuts that are not, or that don't have graphical analogs. For example, you can zoom in, zoom out, and rotate the cube by using your mouse, but you can also use the keyboard for that, so left and right, plus and minus. However, there are some, and like I mentioned, some of the buttons, like you can toggle Harlem Shake mode, clear visualization, or hide the home network range. This is quite useful, and can only be done through a keyboard shortcut. Same, you can take a snapshot if you want to, a single frame by pressing Z. You can play or pause using the spacebar. And to exit the application, as most people are familiar with, you can use Command Q in Linux or Control Q. You do have to have the visualization pane selected for this. And if it doesn't work the first time, just try again. It's not that consistent. Yeah, and again, some general actions from the cube. If you want to show the control panel, the plotter settings, just press P, R, G, and you can easily get to those dialogues. And that's basically it for the InetVis interface. Thanks for watching.